Now I want to get started with The Rock and hopefully not leave injured, okay? Because, again, that's pretty twisted that so many of you wanted to tell me, oh, yeah, I'm ready to go. You know, if you have a grievance, let's talk about it. But let's not stone me first. I have a whole bag of them still, and like I said, I hope to make them a kind of a staple thing in our minds as a church. Today is the Sunday before Memorial Day. And if you know Mason well enough, you know I'm a stickler for making sure I abide by what these days mean. So when we have Memorial Day, it isn't, and I mean no disrespect by this, but it isn't the day that I go up to a man in uniform and say thank you for your service. And the reason I don't do that is because this day is in memory of those who I cannot thank because they died doing it. And so Veterans Day is a chance for me to thank those who did it and came home, and Armed Service Day or Independence Day. Now, you should be thanking a man or a woman in uniform just about every time you see them. But Memorial Day was set aside for the purpose, literally, of decorating graves, but to remember those who had given of their own freedom, their own lives, and were not granted the privilege of returning home from the calling they had surrendered to. To remember, it's in the name, right? It's baked in. Memorial, to memory hold it, to remember. And when that day comes, I have a habit. Some of you, I like to make sure you know as much about me as you're comfortable knowing, but I have a habit. On Monday, at some point, I will set aside time to watch a specific movie. And I actually don't like it very much, certain parts of it anyway. Sometimes I do it out in my office by myself, or I'll watch half of it at home, and then I come up here and maybe I'll watch it in my office upstairs. But I watched the movie Saving Private Ryan. For my generation, for my era, that's the most accurate portrayal, movie-wise, of the greatest generation's surrender to the calling of fighting back, what at least until recently, I guess people might argue otherwise, was the greatest expression of evil on earth. And the reason I watched that movie is not actually for the war stuff. There are parts in that movie I actually skip over. I don't like when the medic calls for his mother. I don't like when the young man is wrestling with a knife with an enemy and he's telling the man, wait. And I skip. I actually watched the movie because of the old man in the beginning. I watched the movie because of Ryan. And I do so because at the end of that movie, spoiler alert, now this came out, we weren't even married. Do you remember when I came home from the movies that day and I was just crying and I couldn't stop? And then I couldn't even watch a science fiction movie, which I'm a goober to watch that stuff. I started crying during that. So we weren't married then, were we? Okay, we were married, sorry, oops. So somewhere, listen, if you haven't watched Saving Private Ryan, that's your fault. The old man at the beginning of the movie is Private Ryan, okay? You're led to think he's somebody else, but he's not. At the end of the movie, everyone save one soldier who was sent to find him is dead. Everybody save one, well, two. But the main character, Tom Hanks of the movie, he is shot and dying, and all of this death surrounding getting one man back home, and right before Tom Hanks dies, he looks at the character who is Private James Ryan, and he says, "Earn this." Now, could you let Jesus look at you from the cross and say the same words? It is so true. Sola gratia. Only grace saves me. But I am not then absolved from the Bible's also instructing me, live worthy of the high calling placed before you. As though from the cross I would experience Jesus looking me in the eye and saying, earn this. Well, then the movie transitions from that moment where he's been told by that man, earn this, an English teacher, and he, late 90s computer graphics morphs, from a young man into that old man at Arlington National Cemetery, and he falls down at the graveside of that Tom Hanks character. And his family comes rushing. Some of you have heard me tell this story year after year after year. It marked my understanding of things through a movie as a young married man. But I watched this movie with my grandfather who served in World War II. And then that old man, he kneels down, he kind of stumbles down, he's overcome. His wife, his children, his grandchildren, they kind of rush over to him. Are you okay? Are you okay? And the man looks at his wife. How many years ago? That's like 20 something. I still get emotional trying to describe it. He looks at his wife and he says, "Tell me I'm a good man." Equally so, can you look at Jesus there in eternity and have any right to hear him say, "Well done"? Or do you realize what grace even that is? Now, with respect, ladies, you don't get it. You can't. Just as we men can't get other things. So the woman, the actress, does it very well, in my opinion. She says, "Well, what are you talking about? Of course you are." But he's reflecting on that statement from a dying man. Earn it. Earn what we did. And so the movie then is kind of a testimony of a man living his whole life remembering that moment. And I thought today would be a good day to reflect on exactly how important remembering is to our Father in heaven. Throughout the Old Testament, when he is talking about himself to his people, when he introduces himself or when he pronounces his godhood and his right to be and command them in the way that he does, he says, "I am the God of your forefathers." In other words, remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm them. I'm their God. I'm your God. But he says, "I'm the one who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of bondage." Always was this call to remember what I did. But we live in a fast-paced, very busy society. Some of you, like me, are so strung out, the only thing you look forward to when you get out of bed in the morning is when you can get back in it. You wake up tired, you wake up exhausted, you wake up strung out. Your children are getting older, but boy, wouldn't it be nice if they could dress themselves? Wouldn't it be nice if they could feed themselves? Wouldn't it be nice if they could drive themselves to school? Wouldn't it be nice when they move out? Wouldn't it be nice that suddenly, where did the time go? Right? We wish things away. Because of our exhaustion, we're just looking for a stopping point. And because we're so busy, sometimes we fail to remember. Have you ever been driving and so busy your brain's somewhere else, thinking of where you're going or what you got to do when you get there or what you just finished? You blow straight through a stoplight, but you honestly have no idea was it green or red. You just drove through it. See, the Bible warns us of this. James says, don't be double-minded. In other words, don't let your mind be somewhere your body is not. Be focused in the moment. God throughout time has called us to remember. And one of the most beautiful places is Joshua chapter 4. In part because it's a combination of all this stuff, and then there's this instruction. There's this important instruction given. And I wonder, would we be willing to receive that same instruction today? Because I think if we did, perhaps for some of us, life would begin to even change. Now, we're going to be in Joshua 4, but before we get there, I'd like to just give you a couple of examples of this repeated pattern of things being done for remembering. That God is very focused on you and I remembering. For example, in Genesis chapter 9, you and I, even from a childhood blessed to grow up in the United States, probably have learned the story of Noah and the flood. And after that flood, I bet everybody in here that can speak English knows, what did God put in the sky after that flood? He put a bow, we call a rainbow, in the sky. And why did he do it? He said because it would be a covenant reminder, a memory trigger. This is chapter 9, verse 13 through 15. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a sign. In other words, so you remember what I'm saying. A covenant between me and the earth. It shall come about when I bring a cloud over the earth that the bow will be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. Never again will the water become a flood to destroy all flesh. a remembering. Now, today we live in a world that would say, actually, do you know why that rainbow appears? Because of the prismatic refraction of water droplets and light passing. Yeah, but God set that system up too. So that symbol, and to this day, isn't it a big deal when you see a rainbow? I don't care how grown you are, you'd be, oh, look out there. It might be this much of the sky, and you're like, get your phone out, take a picture. And Lord have mercy if you see it, what we would call from beginning to end, the whole, it's like you won the day lottery, you know. To remember something. That's why that's up there. Another time in Genesis, Jacob has gotten in a dust-up with a man named Laban. And Laban is chasing him. And at the end of that story, they come to peace. And in Genesis chapter 31, as they come to peace, something is set up so that they would remember it. Chapter 31, verses 44 and following. So now come, let's make a covenant. This is Laban talking to Jacob. Let's make a covenant, you and I, and it shall be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a memorial stone. And Jacob said to his relatives, go gather stones yourself. And so they took stones and they made a heap. And there they ate right beside that heap. Now Laban called that heap of stones Yegar Sahadutha. That's Aramaic. It translates as heap of witness. Jacob called it Gilead. That's Hebrew. It translates as heap of witness. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore it was named Gilead, the Hebrew, and hold on to this word in your head for just a minute, Mitzpah. Mitzpah means the watchtower. For he said, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are absent from one another. Why did they set up that heap of stones? So that they would remember the peace they had made that day between their families. In Genesis 35, verses 14 and 15, Jacob wrestles with God. He has his hip thrown out of socket. And after that's done, he gets a new name. Instead of Jacob, he is named Israel, Israel. And to memorialize that moment, the Bible tells us that Jacob set up a pillar, a stone, in the place where he had spoken with him, that would be God, a pillar of stone. He poured out a drink offering on it, he poured oil on it, and Jacob named the place where God had spoken with him Bethel. Beth, house, El, God. That to remember, this was the time I dwelt with him. This is the house of God. In Exodus chapter 12, that thing that God always makes reference to in the Old Testament, the people were instituted with the Passover supper. And the Passover was a meal that they were to share. Roasted lamb and bitter herbs and flat bread, what we would call flat bread, unleavened bread. These things had all symbolic meanings. But in chapter 12, verse 26 of the book of Exodus, the beginning of the lesson is the people being instructed when your children say to you, what does this rite mean? Now, what would you think comes after that? You'll be able to tell them. All of this is to remember what God did for us that day. Now, one of my favorites is 1 Samuel chapter 7. If you're willing, you want to learn something, I get, it's not silly, but it's just different. Turn to 1 Samuel 7. I'll teach you a word that doesn't sound at all like how you and I say it. 1 Samuel chapter 7, the Philistines have been at war. God has delivered victory. And in verse 12, Samuel sets up a stone, a memorial. It translates as a stone of help. But 1 Samuel 7:12, then Samuel took a stone and set it between Mitzpah. You remember that from previously? So where Jacob and Laban had set up a heap, That's still in 1 Samuel being used as a geographic reference. They remember that spot. But Samuel set up a stone, and he set it up between Mizpah and Shin, and he named it the guy who was visited by 3 ghosts, Ebenezer. You want to learn how to say that correctly? Evan ha-izer. Evan ha-izer. Not Ebenezer, Evan ha-izer. Weird, huh? 4 syllables in that word. You would literally write it English so that you would remember how to say it. E-V-A-N dash capital I, or dash H-A, Evan ha, then capital I, then Z-E-H-R, zer. Evan ha-izer. That is the Hebrew for stone of help. And what did he say when he placed that memorial? Thus far the Lord has helped us. A stone. We sing a song, yes, here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I'm come. Or you maybe sang that a million times and didn't know that you were making reference to that word, Ebenezer, when you were singing. But over and over, perhaps for us as New Testament believers, Jesus instituting the Lord's Supper on the evening he was betrayed, what did he say? Do this in remembrance. God's call for us to remember. We could go further. Deuteronomy chapter 6, the very famous Shema of Israel, which I spoke about even on Mother's Day. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And then after all of a short bit of instruction, it says, you will teach these things to your children. In other words, you're going to remember them enough to teach them to the next generation. And if remembering wasn't important, if old people didn't matter, then why would Paul say elders deserve more honor, but old men teach young men? Old women teach young women. Remember what you've learned. Share it with those who come behind you. High water marks of memory. You have some. But maybe you didn't write them down. Maybe you don't remember the details. They're just thoughts or reflections. But what if we began remembering on purpose? Now turn your attention to Joshua chapter 4, and let's see how on purpose God called for the Hebrew people to remember what he was doing. Now, Joshua chapter 4, Moses is dead. They have wandered for a generation. So all adults who refuse to follow God's command into the promised land, they have deceased. They have gone on. And now it is time for the Hebrew men and women to enter into the promised land under the leadership of Joshua. They come to a river called the Jordan. And God does something there. God holds the water of that river back. Does that remind you and I of anything, by the way? Did he do the same for them as they left Egypt in a sea called the Red? Did he hold the water back there as well? Would they have been expected to remember that as they saw the waters of the Jordan recede? Indeed. But here they were entering into a place more permanent. When they crossed the Red Sea, or the Reed Sea, if you want to be real literal, when they crossed that, they were on the move. It was time to go. This is not where they were going to stay. But when they crossed the Jordan, every inch they touched, that was supposed to belong to them. And so suddenly God gives an instruction to them. Listen, we'll read from chapter 4, verse 1 to 9, and then let's reflect for a moment. Now, when the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan, and they had... Can you imagine standing at a riverbank and just watching it go... And then the water just stopped. I don't know why I made that noise. Sorry, if that offended you, I don't really know what to tell you. I got issues. But it just holds back. And those rocks are dry. And they just walk right through. Now, do you think they kept their eyes forward, or do you think they walked either looking to the left or right or both, getting a crick in their neck, turning back? Is it coming? Is it? Just walking right through. Now, is the Jordan River like the Mississippi River? No. But is it a river? And yet they just walked right through it. They didn't walk on the water. They didn't get their feet wet. They just walked through. And now every one of them is on the other side in Canaan, in the promised land. Jericho, just the other side perhaps of a ridge. And so they have all crossed over. That's where we find Joshua and the people in verse 1. So everybody's over, and the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, take for yourselves 12 men from the people, 1 man from each tribe, and command them, saying, take up for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet are standing firmly, and carry them over with you and lay them down in the encampment where you will spend the night. The priests are holding the Ark of the Covenant in the middle of the river. So Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the sons of Israel, 1 man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, cross again to the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan, and each of you take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel. This shall be a sign among you when your children ask later, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall say to them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall become a memorial to the sons of Israel forever. So the sons of Israel did exactly as Joshua commanded and took up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, just as the Lord spoke to Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel, and they carried them over with them to the encampment, and they put them down there. Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan at the place where the feet of the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing. And I love this phrase, and they are there to this day. A memorial Joshua set up nobody could see. But for our purposes, let's focus on the ones they carried out. Now, I'll grant you, you won't need to carry the rock you were handed or picked or whatever. You won't have to carry that out on your shoulder, but it does tell you a little bit about the size of the stones these men were plucking up from the base of that river. It wasn't like this. They were larger, obviously. But 12 stones from a place that men would not normally be able to get stones from, and set up for a specific purpose. The purpose was that people would look at those stones and ask, why are those there? What does that mean? And the men and women of Israel were expected to be able to answer that question, to know why those stones were there and what was to be remembered. But there are a handful of things happening that I hope will inform our need to create setting stones in our own life that stand to remind us of something. See, at first, by the way, I've been talking about these rocks in staff meetings for a while. But at first, I wanted to buy white rocks. I don't know why. In my head, I just imagined that the rocks in the Jordan are white. They're not. I Googled it. So then I found these. Well, all of these are different. Well, I like that better. You know why? Because all of your memories are different. Because this one can remind me of something that this one doesn't. But this one can remind me of something totally different. Do I want to scatter rocks all in your living room and your dining room and just give you stuff that has to be moved when you dust? Yes, I do. Because I want you to be able to look at them and be forced to remember how good God is. But I want you to notice first, there are a couple of experiences that are taking place. Number one is the possession of the experience. You're literally holding the rock in your hand. You see in verse 2 and 3, God said, take 12 men, 1 from each tribe, command them to take up a stone from the middle of the Jordan, from where the priest's feet are. We need to lay hold to the memories God has given us. And sometimes that will be a time of ugliness. Because my stone might be how I needed redemption from something. And He gave it, but to remember rightly, I must remember where He found me. To remember correctly some things, I will have to revisit for a moment, not be held captive by, but revisit why He had to get me out of it in the first place. I have to possess that experience. I have to have that thing. But we don't do this. How many of you grew, well, I don't know that it's the same or different in Mississippi or Tennessee, whatever, so I'm speaking as a kid who grew up in Mississippi, but it was a big deal to turn 16 years old. You know why? Freedom. You were going to get a car. Now, some of us knew, and nobody's buying a car for me, but they might give me the keys. They're going to give me a driver's license. I'm going to be cut loose. I remember the first night I was given the car keys. I had passed my driver's test. I got in the car. I got to the end of my neighborhood road. I had no idea where to go. I didn't have anywhere to go. All this buildup, and I'm like, well, what do I do now? I decided to go to Wendy's, a habit I would maintain for quite some time. But when I was 16, it was a high water mark for me. What's another one? 18? That's when you can vote. In my state, in my growing up, right, in this state, 21 is the age of majority. Whatever, I don't get that. But in 18, well, that's when I had to register for the United States draft. And Gillette, the razor company, sent me a razor in the mail. Congratulations on your adulthood. I'm not lying. I kept that razor an odd long amount of time. You know why? Because I got it when I became a man. What's another one? 21. Let's not talk about why that one's so popular with people. Unfortunately, that becomes sort of a mess for some. But 21 is a thing. What after that? Sometimes it's buying a home, getting married, having children, starting a career. These are things that we sometimes hold to. But 16, that's the first one. Should there be more? Should we be able to recognize the regularness by which God bestows goodness upon us? Not just date markers of I turned this age, then this age, then this. I remember when I turned 13, that was a big deal for me. Now, I'll confess, I have a hang-up on this kind of thing. I'm not sentimental in the least when it comes to stuff. Like, for example, they're not here today. Papa was having a bad morning. But my house looks a little like a museum of junk. Now, it's very fancy junk, I guess. It's stuff. But sometimes my mom will be teasing. It's not a fuss. But she'll say, you don't even care about all this stuff. And I'm like, nope. When the time comes, it all goes to the yard, and the person who pays the most can have it. I don't care about that picture. I don't care about that statue. I don't care about this thing. I don't care about those. I don't care. But dates and experiences, ooh-wee. So I remember it was a big deal to have the word teen in your age. Not 12. 13. My dad drove a truck my whole life, and we had this dry erase floppy board on the refrigerator. And my birthday is in July. My dad comes in very early in the morning, sleeps all day, drives all night. So I don't see him on my birthday morning. But I walk into the kitchen and I look at the dry erase board, and there's this whole note to me from my father. My dad doesn't write notes. I don't know if you've met him and gotten enough to tell he's not a lyricist. He's not, the word would be loquacious. He's not very wordy, and he doesn't write notes or cards or whatever. But there was this handwritten note from my father about being proud of me because today I was a young man, 13. Now, if you think that kind of stuff isn't important, that marker board is in a picture frame, and I have it to this day because it's a kind of stone to me. Joshua was instructed that the people needed to possess this experience. They needed to have a hand in the remembering part. And so God told him, you tell them, go out there and pick up these stones. Does it make any sense? Are they going to build a house out of these rocks? Are they going to throw these rocks? Are they going to do catapults exist? Is this going to be involved in taking over the town of Jericho? No. They're not told. Just go get it. Some of the experiences that you've lived out, you're in it, you're living it. You don't understand why, you might not understand where it's going or how it's supposed to work out. You've not yet been given the grace to understand the depth of what Romans 8:28 means, perhaps. Or you've just crossed that line and now more than ever before you understand what Romans 8:28 means. All the more reason to understand why you need a stone. You need a marker in your life to remember. The truth is, if you apply this idea of stones, of marking every time you need to remember what God has done or how you've been used in His purposes, or all, you're going to have rocks from here to kingdom come, because that is how good He is. You might say, I can't do anything with that many rocks. Okay, well, let's start small then, because my problem, my contention is we don't have any. What's the last really, really amazing thing you've seen God do in your life? Answer now. You have to think about it? You have to struggle to ponder through it? Then all the more reason we need to create places to stop and remember. You got to possess this experience. You're not just living, you're not just going through the motions. My heart goes out to every person in here who is a young parent, and I don't care if they're little and can't dress themselves or walk, or they're half grown and think they're the boss. You're always stuck waiting for the next phase, or at least I was. Now I don't have a teenager in my entire family. Everybody's 20 years old and up. And that's fine. My daughter is bent out of shape because I'm stretching the date by a week. Cut me slack. She turns 20 a week from Monday. 20 years old. When I got here, they were 5. And I got tons of things to remember. But I was in a rush. 5, they're just learning to tie their shoe. Won't it be nice when they can do that without my help? Nobody asks me to do that anymore. 10, won't it be nice when I don't have to help them with homework? 15, won't it be nice when we don't have to go through this teenage stuff? 16, won't it be nice when I don't have to worry about them and teach them how to drive? Won't it be nice when I don't have to worry with their cell phone bill because they can pay it themselves? All these things, I just wanted to get to the next level. Now, I think I didn't stop to remember enough of it. The second thing that we can see when we look really close at this is the expression of the experience. First, you must possess that experience. God instructed them to do that, just like God is instructing you to do things today. Then there is the expression of it, where you live out that thing that you're called to remember. In Joshua 4 and 5, they literally go do the thing. And you see, for those 12 men, those stones meant something more than those who looked at them. Why? Why would the stones mean something more, or we might say something different to them than they looked to anyone else or mean to anyone else? Because when they saw that stone, they remembered 2 things. 1, which one they carried, and 2, what it felt like to carry it. They knew how that memory that everyone's reflecting on, they knew the expression of the event itself. They knew what it felt like. They knew how, if they were nervous to go back in the water again, they know if they knelt down next to one of those priests' feet, if they looked up at him like, man, this is crazy, isn't it? Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? You know, they knew all of that. Everybody else wouldn't have had that memory, but they did. Why? Because they lived it out. Just like I can't have your memory and you can't have mine. I didn't live your situations. You didn't live through mine. But by nature of sitting here today, guess what we both did? Lived. So we're called to remember what we lived through. And to remember means I first need the experience. Now, some of the experiences I have to reflect on, I do not want to talk about in eternity. I don't know what life would look like if everything I ever did, I didn't regret. Does that make sense? Because the truth is, I got a list of those. The younger me was so burdened by them that I would... There's no way I belong here. Mason just doesn't belong here. save for him saying so, I belong nowhere decent. I am living proof that all of us like sheep have gone astray. I am living proof that my righteousness is as filthy rags. I don't like those memories, but you see, those are the stones that when I look at them, I say, as is popular for people, but God. If I were where I earned, it would not be here. But I also have memories of things I've been allowed to do, though I didn't earn it. Things I've been allowed to see, though I don't deserve it. I know some of you might find it odd, but I've spoken to a woman in a homeless setting who I will not be convinced otherwise was possessed by a demon. I consider that a privilege. That means I was getting my hands dirty. And I'm not celebrating one over the other. I have 3 children. Of all, I am very proud. But today, at least, one of them is in a country on the other, over 8,000 miles from here, sharing what I sought to teach him his whole life. That same son, what in the world will he grow up to be? I don't know. But you know what he says today? Can you minor in preaching? Or can you minor in ministry, I think is the word he said it. And I know the running joke for a pastor, is, oh no, do anything but that. But what? I remember the 5-year-old version. Some of you remember the 5-year. Remember the buck-tooth version? Remember the big dark plastic glasses and the kid walk around with his 2 fingers shoved in his mouth, and he always had 2 huge bumps right here that looked like horns, and he was like walking, he always had a blanket or something, he's doot, 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 and he's very just different, goobery, got to understand how Braden sees the world. And he has a twin sister, and they were 5 when they got here. And she has a heart for compassion and for help. And so what does she want to do? She wants to go to school and become a counselor to help people, because she grew up in a community where she learned people here don't have easy access to that, do they? But it's something I have a giftedness towards. Why? Probably because her parents talk so much. And so she learned to listen. But she had to live out that. You have to experience through the expression of life. God is telling you to do something now. The only reason it isn't done is you. That is a universal truth for his children. Everyone who is in the family of God has been given a purpose. God didn't create a soul that he didn't create a purpose for. The only reason that purpose isn't fulfilled is the soul he created. Well, they won't listen. Well, that won't work. Well, I can't. None of that matters. If you've never heard me say, then listen now. And if you've heard it before, set up a stone to remember it. The only thing your Savior wants from you is willingness. Everything else is his business. The only thing that God has ever asked is for willingness. To just come along. Come with me. I will make you fishers of men. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I have nothing to fear because you are with me. He doesn't need you to be capable. He also doesn't need you to be cleaned up. Because while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. You're living. You're already earning up the things that need to be remembered. But our culture doesn't teach the importance of the remembering. And so we carry it. We live it, we do it, and then there's the placing, the connection of the experience, where the stone becomes a connecting point. It becomes that marker by which you remember the thing that God has done. You remember the thing that God used you to accomplish, the connection of that experience. In chapter 4, verse 8 and 9, it's all chapter 4, so I keep repeating that. The sons of Israel did exactly as Joshua commanded. They had the expression happened, they did the thing, and then they set them up, and then Joshua set 12 stones up in the middle of the river as well. They set those things up so that they would become that marker of what that means to me. What is it to anyone else? It's a rock. To those people of Israel, it was a memory. It was God keeps doing what only God can do. It's how, though it doesn't work all the time, and those people are a really good example that it doesn't, but it's how we can avoid those places where we think He's abandoned us. Everybody knows at least a little taste of what it's like to live on a mountaintop. Everybody's had a good day. But it isn't about living on the mountaintop that matters. It's about how you thrive in the valley, in the down low all the time, every day, where you're probably making mistakes, where you're probably stumbling yet again. You know, that thing you said in January you wouldn't do, well, by May you've done it 18 times. And God, why have you forsaken me? Why did you abandon me? Why? And we got all sorts of flowery and pretty things, right? And everybody knows. I don't even know what it's called, but I don't know why. Sometimes it's hanging in people's bathrooms. That thing about where, you know, somebody's walking with God and then they get some trouble and there's two sets of footprints. Y'all know what I'm talking about? And then there's one set. What's that called? Footprints. And that's convenient. That's a reasonable name for that. You know, and then there's just one set of footprints, and the person says, oh, you said you'd never abandon me. And God says, well, that's not your footprints, you bum. No, it's not what it says. It says, no, that when you saw one set of footprints, that's when I was carrying you. Well, that's true. So why do you feel abandoned? You see, these stones were moments to stop and say, no, that's not how it works. He doesn't abandon me. He stops up rivers for me. He doesn't cast me aside. He drops down food from heaven. Now, we don't know where that ark is to this day, but inside it, why did they put it there? To remember. What's supposedly inside of the ark, y'all might not know. But part of what's inside of there is a jar of manna from heaven. To remember, we wandered all that time. Why didn't we starve to death? Oh, that's right. Because even in disobedience, He fed us. Listen, I'm just as guilty as anybody. Let the days be bad long enough, and then you got one of those moments where you go out to your car, turn the key, and it goes click, 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 it won't crank. The battery's dead. Or you walk out to the car, and before you get in, you notice your back rear tire is flat. And you think, what did I do to deserve this? Suddenly you feel abandoned by your Maker, that He would allow for a flat tire, that He would allow for a dead battery. Doesn't He know I overslept and will be late to work because of this? And He gave me a bum husband who won't even hook up the battery tender so that I can get a jump start. Why have you you said I couldn't be snatched out of your hand, and here I am snatched with a dead battery. That's why I need this. I'm telling myself one more time. There's a story, I ain't got no new stories. 15 years, I don't have any new stories. I guess I need new memories. But very early on, very young pastor, we still had at the time Terminex. Y'all know what that is? Terminex. Bug man comes and I had an appointment to get to in town in Louisville. And at the time, office hours were 8 to 12. And it was like 11:58. And so it was time to go, but the bug man hadn't shown up. And I'm like, too bad, so sad about the bug man. I don't like spiders, don't get me wrong, but he ain't here and I got to go. So I get in my car. I get to the edge of that driveway and my phone rings. Hey, this is the Terminex man. And I'm so sorry I'm late, but I'm on the way. Boy, I was abnormally angry about it because this was messing with my schedule and my day. And to give you the short version, by the end of that experience, that man was sitting in my office asking me to explain the gospel to him. Now, nobody knows this, not even my wife, and she normally knows everything. But I have a little painted rock. I have no idea where it came from. I assume from one of my children I don't know. It's a little brown rock. It's got a yellow cross on it. And it's in my collection of stuff in my office, one of the shelves, just a little rock. I mean, it's nothing. It's just a little rock with a yellow cross. Every time I look at it, I remember that bug man. And the memory instructs me, don't be in a rush. Last is the profession of our experience. In verses 6 and 7, the instruction is given to them. This, and it's talking about the stone, shall be a sign among you. And when your children ask later, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Then you will tell them that the waters of the Lord were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones shall be a memorial to all the sons of Israel forever. The profession, to tell somebody. Here's what I like to imagine. That God lets me be faithful to this idea long enough that in my office at some point on my desk, it starts to look like this. You know what I want to do? I got this little tiny leather journal. When I get a rock out of our little collection here, I want to describe it and then write why I'm putting it there. But then I have this collection of rocks, and somebody comes and asks to speak with me in my office. I say, sure, have a seat. And we sit down, and they see that, and they're like, what are those rocks for? Oh, glad you asked. And then I profess, well, this one is when this happened, and this one is when this happened, and this one is when this happened. Maybe this one is when my son got married, and I saw that raising a child is not easy at all, but sometimes you see great and mighty things come to fruition, and it reminds me of how good God is, that whether I know the story or not, as long as I'll be patient, He's going to play it out right. And maybe this one is my son went on a mission trip and came home surrendering to men. I don't know. And this one is my daughter wants to do these great and mighty things, and I saw her do what she didn't even believe possible. I'll go through the whole list with them. I'll bust my notebook out and be like, well, that yellow one means, well, the blue one means, whatever. Why? Because you were created to testify, to tell. In American culture, Jesus represents redemption and silence. Get your get-out-of-jail-free card and never say it again. Don't bring it up. Mind your business. Let everybody else do what they want to do. You don't talk about it, even with your own family. And yet, even when Jesus wouldn't let people follow Him, early in His ministry, there were people who would want to go with Him or follow Him like the 12 closest ones were, and He would say, no. The demon-possessed man, the Gerasene demoniac, Jesus, that's the legion, the pigs, right? He casts all those pigs out. That man is clean and in his right mind. He wants to get in the boat with Jesus, and Jesus says, no, you can't go with me. Go into town and tell them what I did. When He meets a woman at the well in John chapter 4, she doesn't go home and say, man, that was a crazy experience. My life has changed forever. She walks into the town and says, come meet a man who's told me everything I've ever done. When He heals people from blindness or sickness, He says, go show yourself. In other words, testify of your healing to the priests. Go tell what happened. And I want to end with what hurts my feelings to say, but it's true and needs to be spoken. Is it possible that the reason we don't tell is because we don't have anything to tell? I cannot testify to God's goodness when I don't know it. I was watching a sermon recently. Adrian Rogers is back in my algorithm on the internet, and I was watching him preach on testimonies. And he said, now some of you may say to me, preacher, are you saying that the man who lives out in the middle of nowhere, who's never heard the name of Jesus, that dies and he goes to hell? And Adrian says, that's exactly what I'm saying to you. And he says, well, then you might say that's unfair, and I don't want to believe that. And then he says, my response is, well, that's your problem. I like the directness. And he said, the question you should be asking isn't if you don't hear, do you go to hell? It's if you don't tell it, are you going to heaven? Which made me ponder, maybe we don't tell it because we don't know it. I don't know it because I never received it. Jesus said himself, can the blind lead the blind? No. Except technically, yes, into a pit. When's the last time you told, well, I put my rock back in the bag, man, I'm sorry. This one's mine, y'all can't have this. You can come get whatever you want, but you can't have this one. That's why I asked you to take a rock today. When I pray about you, for you, and over you, recently one thing has come up in my quiet time. It's just like half a sentence, need to remember. Need to remember. So I submit this to you, having no idea why you might need it. You can take as many as you want. If those bowls are empty, that bag isn't. You can come up here, this big old thick plastic bag, take another one. Trade out the one you got because you don't like the way it looks, that's fine too, I don't care. But maybe holding this stone would give you a reason to think, what is it I need to be remembering? Something as simple as when Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. What did he mean? And if you find you don't know the answer to that, I have good news. I know. I'll tell you. But maybe you have other things you need to remember, harder things, even slightly hurtful things. That's what I hope this could become for you, just a place to reflect. That all reflection would ultimately point back to God and his goodness, even in the midst of my absence of good. That maybe these rocks would become a heap of grace. That we would reflect on how good he is in the midst of whatever I am. That we would all know this. And if it takes a little rock in your hand to help that along, I'll give you as many as you want. Jesus would have known of those stones. We can know of those stones, but we can also set up our own. A memorial, a thing to remind me of what God has done. Let's pray together. Father, I have no idea, even in my own heart, if a stone can make sense, but I pray it can. As always, Lord, I pray you take the words of a foolish mouth and you make them mean more than a man could ever intend. Spirit, that you would speak directly to us in the places that we need to hear so that we could be what you have created us to be, what you have redeemed us to be, what you died to make us. Jesus, I pray we could all in this room be that. Some of us, that journey might require some reflection. So I pray you would bless the desire to set up stones in our lives, places to remember. And even as we see and hear and live with young people, that we would see these stones as a reminder that one day they will ask, why are you this way? What is that for? What does that mean? That we could answer them in faith about your goodness, about your watch care. I pray that you would bless these little stones, that even in our own lives, they would become our own Ebenezers, our own Ebenezer. That you help us, and we need to remember. Bless us with remembering. Bless us with honesty in our memory. Bless us with hope and excitement in our dreams, in our visions, in your plans for our future. that we would be one in the body of Christ, redeemed for freedom's sake and for your glory. May you be blessed by what we choose to commit ourselves to this day. In your name I pray. Amen.